Michelle.
Daniel.
OG Rose.
And today we have a very, very special guest on this fine afternoon sitting on the porch. The children have gone on an adventure on the Gator, and we have the wonderful Holly. Holly, how are you doing?
I'm good. I'm eating excellent pasta right now.
I
And,
know.
out in the beautiful countryside, so I couldn't be better.
Well, we're doing well. It's been a thrill to have you. So we have been talking in the kitchen and walking and different things. I think there's a creek trip in order at a point, but we were talking about the interesting relation between art, money, business, marketing, and all these different things, and how marketing in of itself can be a creative act, how there's kind of a lot of artists who are like, I hate marketing, and I would be one of them, but then at the same time, over the years, you come to appreciate how marketing also kind of forces you to think about your art in terms of something that people can understand, which actually makes you be more critical. I find, when you're like, oh, wait a minute. I'll never forget reading Robert Olson Butler on kind of the idea of just because I have a movie playing in my head does not mean the sentences actually successfully make a movie play in the head of the reader. Because you have this kind of disadvantage where you know what it's supposed to look like in Turn the World or Blackout or, Under the Wing or whatever. But you then actually lose sight of the fact that that sentence does not actually successfully aesthetically create the experience of walking down a hall. Like the example I've made a few times is if I say, Grandma's room was at the end of the hall and Don walked to it. Okay, all the information is there. You know what, but it's actually not a good sentence in terms of story. It should be Don walked down the hall to her grandma's room. And the reason is because you need to start the camera on Dawn and she walks to grandma's room and you can follow the image, right? But you see, it's kind of funny because when you just think about telling your story, you might be less critical of your sentence structure because you have the movie playing in your head, but actually think about, no, I need to make this something that other people can read and can enjoy, actually can assist you in the aesthetic process, not necessarily hinder the aesthetic process. Now, the creative process. Now, there is, of course, the creation that is, what do I create so that everybody, likes my stuff? And that doesn't seem right. But then there's another form of it that I always think about that actually is thinking about your audience can help you be a better creative. So it's very interesting. There's a lot of tensions here that are interesting. I really appreciated Holly's video talking about making content, how that can inhibit you, the joy of creating experiences for people. So it's a very interesting topic, and we were just talking about that a little bit over the last few days.
Well, I'll just say when Holly and I were talking about that too, it's sometimes challenging to balance being consistent and then being like taken up by inspiration or the muse. And folks do it differently. In a way, I want to say that people will find their own thing, but there's also a part of it where strategizing can be important and necessary these days because artists and creators are not just wearing that hat. They're also wearing the hat of being a promoter. They don't have to, but if they want any chance of doing something with their art or getting it out or having other readers or selling their books, I mean, you have to wear the promoter hat, whether you like it or not. So I don't know. There's a part of me that feels like, and you and I have talked about it a lot, Daniel, like the idea of having the burst nature we do as humans, or I can just speak for myself, where it's like, oh, you get a burst and you're inspired and you do it, and then you either never really, maybe even don't even finish that project, or kind of move on, or I don't say forget about it, but it's almost like, well, you just don't keep doing it, or you sort of just let it sit in a folder or something like that. So I mean, I think this is like why inspiration has to be paired with the consistency. I think it has to be because, I don't know, like this is just such a direct example, for my life, where I'm thinking about like, there's like the inspirational moment of like conception, but then like you have children and then it's just the quotidian thing, and there's an immense love, but the everyday is filled with, you just need to do what you need to do. But there's also a wild and radical beauty in that. Like, it's kind of the difference. And I like this, sorry, one last thing, more analogy, because that's how kind of my brain works. But I sort of think of this motherhood, I'll just use that as what I was talking about, as that's kind of like mountain climbing, right? Mountain climbing and descending, and climbing and descending. Whereas a lot of the other way to work where it's bursty, or maybe there's not the long mediation of the project like Cadell will talk about, is like roller coaster, right? Super fast, super zippy, but then it also stops, and guess what? If someone else doesn't press the button, you ain't moving. And also you're on a track, so it's just like you know. So yeah, that could be really fun, and that could be really neat, and in and of itself can be a type of project or work. But is that sustainable? I don't think so.
Yeah, and that's the thing. There is what I was sort of just starting to get at, because this is such an iceberg, right? And I was hitting the tip of the iceberg in my first video, where I just, felt the need to say something. But, it goes on and on and on and expands and expands. And the thing is, there's so much push and pull, and there are so many, like you were saying, Daniel, in our other conversation, was just trade-offs about what you're trading in, what you're getting out of it and stuff. So, I think that ultimately, marketing does help creativity, even though I complain about it all the time, because it can be difficult, and it can put you in a mental space that maybe you don't want to be in, but it makes your bursts longer, actually, because they're larger bursts. So like for me, it becomes a whole long-term project that'll span over, weeks and months, rather than just when inspiration hits. And it can make inspiration hit, which is the really scary thing to get into, because I don't know, before I got to that, I didn't believe that was possible. Right. Because I think most artists that I talk to anyway start off thinking that you have to wait for that perfect inspiration every time. That's how I was when I was younger, and I mean, still, that's the ideal. That's the best feeling. That is the best feeling. It's, it's that high of when the perfect sentence comes to mind, or you draw the perfect line, and that's great. But taking that leap into, and a lot of people would say this isn't a leap because it sounds so much more linear, but taking that leap into making your art into a schedule and fitting it into a marketing plan actually helps in the long term, and helps you to expand, and helps you to be inspired more often, because you've put a framework in your mind that you have to be. But still, we fight back and forth with it, right? And that's the place I get into every once in a while. I'll be going along and I'll be happy, okay, I'm putting out my weekly video, I've got in the groove, and then it's totally unpredictable. Something just hits me where I don't want to be doing something scheduled. What am I doing right now? And it's like this I don't know, baseline artistic panic of why am I scheduling my art? What am I doing? And then you have the two sides of you fighting back and forth. So that's what, and I mean, if my speaking on this subject sounds a little chaotic, it's because I'm kind of in that chaotic place with it right now.
I think that is absolutely perfect. Yeah, it's interesting, because as you were talking, I think about how the artist seems to have this tension of discipline, I don't know, structure and inspiration. Whereas the philosopher has this tension of abstract versus concrete. And it's interesting how there seems to be similarities there. Where the philosopher is kind of like, oh, I got to be concrete and practical, and there's this concern also, what are we doing anyway? We're just doing like high in the sky ideas, and it doesn't have any real impact on anything. And then they randomly just say it's stupid and stop. Right? You have
and that's definitely the artist as well.
Yeah, and it's just kind of interesting, that parallel, because you also have there's this feeling where the artist, if it's not inspired, it kind of doesn't feel validated. Like the inspiration validates it, and if you're just kind of regularly showing up and doing the craft, there's something that feels like you're forcing it, and you're just playing anyway, and it's silly.
It can't possibly be quality if you're doing something on a regular basis, and sort of, I can't think of the word I'm trying to get at, but it'll come eventually.
Sure, like
that methodical, regimented.
Well, I to relate it back to motherhood, I remember having times like that too, where I'd be like, well, I don't want to be like too regimented and structured. I just want to kind of go with the flow. And there's actually a value in learning how to go with the flow, because children will teach you very quickly. Like you will need to learn how to do that to some degree. But I realized that actually having some sense of a structure and a rhythm is really important, not only for me, for them, just so they have a sense of like what is the day, and how does it comprise, and how does it flow, and what you need those little markers sometimes to just sort of hang it's like hooks to hang your hat on, or something like that.
Well, there's a quote, and I don't know if like who made this quote, but my mom has said it, and I think I'm not sure where she got from, but it's I must have order in my life so that I can have chaos in my art.
Oh yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
And
No,
I don't
and
know
that's
who originally said that, but I find that that's
Yeah.
very true
I
as
think
well.
1000%,
Yeah, I need to be
Yeah, I
ordered.
think the
and-
director of the Moulin
So
Rouge,
good.
he was a genius director. He was like almost like a clean freak and
Yeah.
an order freak, and he said the reason he was so that he could be chaotic creatively.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's almost like if you have too much chaos, you break. But if you
Yeah.
have too much order, you're useless. You know, you're rigid, right? And and again, it's just interesting because there's a parallel in philosophy where if
Yeah.
you're too particular, then you're just, I guess, an economist or something, or like scientists. But if you're too abstract, then it's meaningless, and you've
Yeah.
got to figure out. It's almost like I just think of that Jefferson ideal of the plowsmith, the guy plowing the fields while reading Ovid. It's almost like the best. A lot of my favorite philosophers were also people who worked with their hands, or they were on the ground, or they liked to play games in the pub, like David Hume or something, or Michel Planier. Yeah, the asparagus is great. Michelle did a nice
sure.
job.
Okay.
Man, that asparagus is
Daniel, would
awesome.
you like
Very
that?
good.
I will take a little more,
Okay.
honey. And it's
I was
almost
like, there's only so little. We must finish
we'll
it.
finish it there. And it's almost like the best philosophers have a certain sort of grounding principle in the same way that the best artists. I think there is something to be said about a lot of the artists. I don't know if I want to say best, but there does seem to be something about the artists who are able to stick to something more concrete, something more hard.
I
that
think
are
they
able
have
to
more
create.
staying power.
Yeah, I think that's true.
The ones that are too chaotic, they're not going to make it.
Yeah, they're gonna burn themselves out.
Yeah.
I think that applies to philosophers too. I think there's something where if the philosopher is not concrete enough, the systems or cathedrals or whatever they build in their head, if they don't crush them, they get lost in them and lose the capacity to find the way back. There's some parallel there.
Yeah. Well, and I think too. I mean, just with that example with children, they are just a constant source of inspiration, and they are themselves inspired by lots of things. Just thinking about like how excited they get. Like the kids recently are like, they ran to me like all excited, like, "Mommy, mommy, mommy! We saw the first butterfly of spring!" And it was just so cute, and they're so excited about it. And I think that there's something about, I feel like when I wasn't as aware of the need for a rhythm and maintaining that, then it seemed like, oh, that seems like so much kind of effort, but it's actually you put in some effort to figure out what that is, and then being consistent with that, and then it like opens up a lot more, and like, I don't know, space for them to play, for you to play. When you need to play and when you need to kind of be doing your chores. It just creates a lot more of the opportunity for the creativity. I think so, because otherwise it's kind of like, again, if you just have, you fear that it's going to be too regimented, or like it's not going to be enough time for the open space, then you end up like not being able to access that open space to the greatest capacity, energy wise or mentally wise.
Right.
And then so it almost like defeats the purpose. And so just having that sense of rhythm, and we think about this with music, right? Like music has to have a consistent, like, consistency. Now I'm not talking about like creating the music now, which is, I know this is a different topic, but I'm just thinking about the forms, and music has to have that consistency for us to even experience it. And so but it has a variation of all those notes, or it suddenly becomes allegro, or like it has different pace, or so. Yeah, I think that is very like telling of why it's necessary, and that Daniel, another thing we'll talk about is like what you fear is what you become. So if you're like worried about this thing of like, oh, there won't be enough like creative playtime, it's like, yeah, if you're fearing that, then you won't, because you'll all be so tired or kind of crabby because you're not getting like eating your meals at a certain time or getting snacks.
That's
Kids'
the thing,
blood sugar is really important,
And when you bring up children have pretty much all of that time to be in that headspace. They have parents saying, you have to do this now, but generally, like, their default is to be in that free creative headspace. And when you grow up, there's just, unfortunately no avoiding that you can't do that.
Yeah.
So the best way to do that, because if you're just living normally and not planning and just, in your chaos all the time, you actually have less opportunity to find that. rather than if you're ordered and you say, all right, you know, my work, my cleaning ends at this point of the day, and now it's just free. You've dealt with all of that other stuff rather than
100%.
dealing with it, you know, randomly throughout the day, throughout the week, and you have created those spaces to completely do what you want to do.
Exactly. 100%. It's so necessary, but so difficult to kind of get on board with, like, wait, that would really be actually good for your creativity.
Yes.
That would be good for your organic
And a lot of artists don't want to hear that.
No, yeah. And maybe it's just a tricky thing of, like, just staying consistent. Gee, that's hard. It's hard to just be one to keep maintaining that. However, I think when you find what that is for you, then it starts to become like second nature, or that's the hope. Now, when it doesn't, we could get into questions of why that is, but that the hope would be that there's that second nature.
And it does break every once in a while, even when you do get into
into
your groove. Because I mean, usually that means that's sort of a sign that you need to just change what you're doing a little bit, and that helps your art evolve.
Yeah,
Sure.
But that idea of planning, it's just, I don't know. It's so interesting because a lot of times too, for much of life, a lot's planned for you, and then suddenly you're like, oh, I have to plan.
Yes.
Oh. And it's like, it's literally not going to happen if you don't make it happen. You know, it's, unless you're just kind of like maybe have the space or the leisure, which is great if you can, to just sort of do it whenever you want to. But if you don't, then if you don't plan for a time for it to happen, it's really not going to just happen spontaneously out of its own. Randomly, you're just going to do it. Nope, you won't. And so, yeah, I don't know. I think it's just, maybe that's part of like becoming an adult or having like responsibilities where you just say like, I can't believe this sort of like fabrication that anything planned is not going to be as good creatively.
Yes,
because
absolutely.
It certainly can be. It certainly can be. And a lot of planning is not so much planning in detail, regimentally what you're doing. So sometimes it can be, but sometimes it's just also just giving yourself some time. It's
planning blocks.
Exactly, planning the
not
blocks.
necessarily super detailed elements within those blocks.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean that adult thing is where the money comes in as well, right? Because when you're younger, you're creating to create, and that's, you know, that is what we were talking about. That's the sort of artistic ideal we see put forward a lot, that you should create just to create.
Right.
But, you know, we live in a society, and you can't always do that.
Yeah. 100%.
Well, I think it doesn't help when you almost have a kind of, we were talking about almost like a puritanism, a new form of puritanism, where the very act of talking about money as an artist is dirty.
Yes.
And it's just very interesting because there's, you know, it's pretty well agreed upon that various religious traditions of purity were problematic, even oppressive, but it slips in more discreet forms that you don't even notice. And it's like, no, the artistic process should not be infringed upon by, you know, planning. You're planning when you're going to create. That's dirty, or, you know, that's going to inhibit it, and so on and so forth. And the same with money. It's like, oh my gosh, you know, you're thinking about money. You shouldn't do that. There's not all ways of thinking about money are the same. And I think also not all ways of thinking about planning are the same, quote unquote. Like, the way I think about it is in the same way that if you go to bed tonight at 8 o'clock, tomorrow around 8 o'clock you will be sleeping. If you eat food today at noon, tomorrow around noon you will be hungry. You know, the body tends to naturally formulate what happens is your body kind of almost automatically associates doing what you did yesterday the same time tomorrow.
Yeah.
Not always, but it generally does that. Now, if that is the case, then it could be, and I think it is the case, that if you actually train your body to be right, you know, quote unquote, right brain, as they say, between 7 a.m. and 10 a.m., then your body just does that. And the way to think about it for me is you are creating a kind of summoning. It's not merely a plan. You're creating a way to get your entire body ready to summon certain things at certain times. And the word of plan, it is a kind of plan, but the word plan is so dirty to creatives. You know, a way I guess I think about it is, what do you need to do to have your body or brain summon the focus, summon the creativity? What do you need to do to make that happen? And if you think of it that way, because creativity has to somehow figure out how to make this body of yours do something that it seems to have no control over. Yeah. Like, creativity seems uncontrollable. but you need to somehow figure out how to like control the uncontrollable in a way, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's like growing a garden then. That's like tilling a garden, and you plant the seeds, and then a process you don't have full control over can occur. But I promise you that if you throw seeds in a random spot in the woods, the likelihood of them growing is much lower than if you put it in an intentional space where you've tilled the dirt and you've taken out the weeds. Like a garden is an intentional space for the uncontrollable. And I think the artist needs to think about planning that way. You are creating an intentional space for the uncontrollable.
I like that.
But the likelihood of the uncontrollable occurring is much less if you do not have that intentional space. And I think, you know, another way to think about it is like you literally, if your body gets used to at 6 a.m. or 7 a.m. or whatever, I think basically, I mean, in my opinion, it's good to make whatever your body associates creative time with to be a time where you're not disturbed for a while, an hour or two, or it's not likely you're going to get messages. That tends to be morning or nighttime. It depends. But if your body gets used to focusing between 8 a.m. and 10 a.m., and if you do that today, then tomorrow it's ready to do that, or more ready. And then after you do that for a few weeks, you get a consistent sort of, the body is ready to do this thing. Because I think this is what has happened, and then I'll pass it, is that I think people have, like, well, you can't will creativity. Well, that's correct. You can't just sit down and will creativity. But you can, over 3 weeks, till the soil to increase the probability of an uncontrollable event occurring. Like you can create the associations of your brain, the associations of your body with certain times of the day, certain activities, where then after 3 weeks, or maybe 3 months, well, let's say 5 months, who cares? You know, if you get it for 5 months and then it's set, you know, you've established association. So I guess I think about it as, how do you get your body to associate, your brain to associate certain sequences, certain times of day with the creative process? Or now we're doing the blue collar process, or now we're doing the manual labor process, or now we're fixing the toy room or something. Like, then you are increasing the probability that the uncontrollable occurs. And I think if the artist thinks of it that way, they can start moving away from these negative associations of planning and structure. And it's like, no, think about it as being intentional about creating a space where the uncontrollable has a higher probability of occurring. That's helped me think about it, at least.
Yeah, I think another thing too with that is, we probably generally, well, I don't, okay, let me redact that.
Oh, you
I'm going
have
to talk
one.
about generally the society. Also, there is more if you'd like more
That's very
pasta,
good.
more
Would you
mushrooms.
like some more?
Oh no, I'm full, thank you.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
But just the idea of like feeling like you are, honestly, like feelings are great. I always like to think about feelings like seasoning to stuff. It's actually, it's not the potatoes, right? It's not the actual substance of the meal, but they're flavors. They add flavors. They can be bitter, they can be sweet, they can be salty, they can be, you know, spicy. And that's what feelings are. They're a wonderful accoutrement or whatever, addition to life. But they're not the meal itself. You know, you can't really survive, I don't think, maybe not for very long, on just the seasoning itself. Like the herbs and the spices. They don't have the same type of, like, let's just talk about like vegetables. They usually have a good lot of different types of glucoses in there. Like, you know, vegetables actually have some good sugars for the body and all of these things. So the point of the matter is that it's the thing that makes life what it is, you know. But with it not having the same substance to it, we don't want to end up like relying on it as if it can be the sustainable thing or make us like sustain us. But it's hard in I don't know, in the therapeutic age where it's just like, oh, do I feel like I want to do it? Does it feel good? Do I feel like am I vibing with it? If I'm not vibing with it, then I'm not going to be doing it, you know? And I get it, like art, you do kind of want it. Yeah, the ideal would be you feel like amazing. You feel like you're like, you know, in this vision and like you're going or whatever. But we can't necessarily just associate that with like feeling good or feeling like you want to do it. And sometimes, like the way that Daniel and I would talk about like creative, when you feel swept up in something, I don't know if you'd say it's good or bad. Like it's like this complete, like you're being dragged. There's something crazy about it. It's not necessarily easy to describe it as good or bad. It's wild, it's strange, it's a little alarming how pressing it feels or whatever. But but like, yeah, it's definitely incredible too in its own right. But just that feeling reliance we have, like we're very and I mean, we're all susceptible to that, and it's just I think it's really takes, because even talking about it again feels like, well, are you saying like feelings are bad? Like, it's not about, again, they are seasonings. I love seasonings. That's why I like to cook. But it's just that they aren't the main substance of the meal. So you need to have that substance of it. And I think when we forget that we put too much emphasis on the feelings and do I feel like doing it, assuming that feeling like doing it is going to mean it's amazing. It might be amazing, might be really, really cool. But it might be really, really cool if you feel this other type of compelling and you just do it because you feel like you need to. The feeling might be more like the compelling. And I've always liked that term from Rilke. Like, it feels like you're compelled to do it. And you almost put yourself under that type of quote-unquote obligation. But it's also very, very beautiful. Something quite beautiful comes out of that in terms of even the feelings. But it's not necessarily like you always just feel like doing it. So I wanted to say that.
Yeah, well, and I think what we're talking about here is sort of the healthy artist, right? Which seems to be an overarching theme in the conversation. And I think a big problem is the romanticization, and this, works into feelings, romanticizing the starving artist or the unhealthy artist or the suffering artist, and that you must have those things to be creative. So there are so many things piled on top of the artist right now that stop them from speaking outside of that, because the second you step outside of that, the second you, maybe say no to the compulsion sometimes because it's not the right time, or if you, refuse to plan, or just if you consume too many substances, that sort of thing. Like there are all these things that you're told to say yes to negative things as an artist many times, and that can be hard to deal with. And that includes, like, saying no to money, which we talked about with commodification. So there's this what do I call it? Like there's a battle, I guess, between the unhealthy artist and the healthy artist right now, and that is becoming more and more apparent and talked about because we now have to be responsible for so much more than ever with the promotion, and that's where the trade-off comes off, right? You are more in control than ever, which is a good thing, but that means you have to step up to that. You have to be healthy enough to be in control, because gone are the days, largely, of the, artist languishing in their studio while their agent did everything.
Oh no, I think that's exactly right. Hey guys! Wow! I think the emotional association of starving with more real of an artist or more committed or something, I think that is especially an unsustainable narrative. Yeah, I think that kind of myth or association, I don't want to say myth, because there were certainly many artists who were starving and so on and so forth.
And they've been successful in that way too, and people often point to them.
Yeah.
This artist did that and they were brilliant.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Sure. And so, I don't think there's such thing as a way that is necessarily going to fail once you get to the obviously doomed. I mean, yeah, sure, you can cut yourself off from society and live in the mountains and be successful. That's fine, of course. I think, though, one should not automatically associate that with something more moral or true or something. It's no different than, one of the things that is destroyed, in my opinion, say Christianity, is people associating true work of the church with the missionary. So then they're not doing anything in their communities. They're not doing anything, in media, because they're like, well, the only real Christian would go to a third world nation and share the gospel or something, right? Well, then you don't do things you can do, or you're creating a certain mental association that keeps you from, say, being active in your community to help people.
You're just building barriers.
Yeah, that's correct. Exactly right. And so I think in the same way that there's just it's dangerous to assume that any way of doing it is necessarily better, that there isn't space for many ways. And I think, too, what I was going to say is that the idea of doing everything, that sort of way of being especially is going to crush you in a world today where you have so many hats. Like if you've got to market,
exactly.
you've got to publish, you've got to network, well then you've got to get some business sense. You've got to figure out a sustainable model. You've got to figure out how to create content in a way that's not going to destroy you. And if in your mind, hey, like if you, there's a fork right there, if there are some ways of doing things that are holier than others, if you will, as an artist, then you're going to cut off ways of doing things that may actually help you make this sustainable, simply because you'll associate them with a certain dirtiness or something. And I think that's happening, and so it's just very important. I think the other thing too I think the other thing that goes with the creative is perfectionism. One of the reasons why, because I think it almost goes together. Like, you're a perfectionist, so you want to make sure it's perfect, and you feel as if you need to wait for inspiration so that it's perfect, and if inspiration's not there, it's not going to be perfect, and so then you don't do it.
Yeah.
And the other thing too is perfectionism is especially destructive, I think. Thank you, honey. Is especially destructive in where you have to make YouTube videos, where you have to make content, because the amount you need to engage with is very high, or it can be, and if every single interaction has to be perfect, you will go crazy.
Yes.
You will go nuts.
Definitely reached those points myself.
Oh yeah.
And what I was talking about in my video right now is that when I do create those videos that are less than perfect, right? Like that maybe they're not exactly what I want to be making, but people are still liking them, then that artist in me comes out and says, that's not exactly it, and it's not as creative as you could be, and maybe the information is like more basic than what you want to be sharing, and are you just, spitting stuff out for the sake of spitting stuff out, when there isn't actually anything wrong with that stuff. Because people do enjoy it. If people are getting knowledge out of it, that's not a bad thing. I'm putting out certain types of information so that the people who want to hear that will hear it, and it will be available to them. So there's really that push and pull.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, it's just like, obviously, right, this is not a video, this is just an audio recording, and it's like you can do it. If you did a whole video, it would be a much more elaborate process. You couldn't edit anything. We're sitting outside, so at any moment there could be a giant gust of wind that destroys everything. But the other thing is, if you make the bar too high, then you just end up not doing it at all.
And that is where I am right now.
Yeah.
And also, if you sometimes if you set up projects that are too lofty, that'll do it too. So you need to sort of be aware of where you're at and what you're capable of within your planning.
Oh, absolutely. Lofty means, Haven, kind of too high. Like you set too high of a bar. It's more important as
to get in the sweet golden.
Well, that's true. And I mean, you really want to make sure when you set goals you can pass them. Otherwise, you associate goals with things you don't pass.
Yes.
You become depressed, or you give up, and then you don't do anything.
And you feel like it's like essential to beat those goals, and you kind of lose track of like anything else.
You can do that as well.
Yeah.
You can get a tunnel vision.
Sometimes people become so driven with that one thing that they cannot do anything else until they've accomplished it. And what if they never accomplish it? Then what else are they going to be doing?
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct. Yeah, and I think also, like, on that point of having too lofty ambitions, I think that's another thing. I think there's something also, though, about the regularity and consistency that helps you from creating unobtainable goals, actually, because the other thing that inspiration does is when it hits, it creates this giant thing that you're gonna do, and then when you don't do it, it weighs on you, because everything that enters your head you don't complete can become a weight.
Yeah, and if you let's say you do have your big tunnel vision goal, you can have that, but you should try to add stuff in that you can accomplish
along the way,
because every little thing you accomplish is going to make you feel better and help you work better.
Exactly.
So even if you think, oh well, why would I set that as a goal, that's easy, just put it on your to-do list and check it off, and you're going to feel better about it.
It would be well, it's funny you mentioned that. I strongly agree. Like, for me personally, using the YouTube where you do an audio summary, and, you know, they're mostly still images. Because I can do a weekly still, you know, I can do a weekly audio summary. And the audio summaries force, it almost, I kind of use YouTube to force me to keep a schedule.
Yeah.
You know, where okay, it's Monday, I have to edit a paper. Well, I don't want, well, you got to do it. And you get used to it, so it's not like a psychological anxiety thing. It becomes just kind of mechanical.
Yes.
But that mechanicalness is actually a kind of blessing. Because it's not an anxious, crazy thing. It's like, okay, we got to edit a paper. We got to get something together and do an audio. And so, you know, I think of the Truism of the Rational, the trilogy, the kind of epistemology trilogy. You are missing out, Reed. That asparagus is good. You know, the Truism of the Rational is, you know, it's been 5 or so years that you're building, and reconstructing Isaiah is kind of done, but then you add to it, and you're like, that's not good. And you build, and you have these things that are not finished, but if every Monday you're getting one essay done, you're getting a reading done of a book, Belonging Again, or Thoughts, or whatever, well, then you have little things along the way that feel like progress.
And that's one of the things that we were saying, how stuff like marketing, which a lot of people see as, you know, just a hindrance and taking time away from your art, which I've definitely been guilty of thinking many times. I think we all think it every once in a while.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to sit down and plan social media. I want to write.
Yeah.
But that does help set those goals. So marketing does help you be more creative.
Absolutely.
And also in the way you create your images and stuff like that. So you can be creative in marketing, but I think everyone knows that element of it. But the one that's less talked about is how it will get you to that end goal a little more easily. So it is helpful there.
Oh yeah, and I think the key is to just plan your marketing as goals towards your project.
Yeah.
Like, if you make your marketing or building your platform, because as we all know in the creative writing world, when all the agents are like, well, we want you to have a platform, and you're just like, guys, the reason I'm looking to you is to make a platform. What are you telling me? So why do I need you? And you just shake your head. Anyway, if you go, well, I'll create a platform with audio summaries of the papers that I'm writing toward the goal, or of the stories that you're doing. So you're creating a platform out of the process of your project, as opposed to making it additive to it.
Yeah, that is the key, is having them hold hands rather than be separate. And that can be really hard. It can be hard. It's really hard to get into that groove when you're just starting out, because it's different. It's very different, and it's very new, because you're used to you know, finishing the drawing, finishing the chapter, and then suddenly you need to record it more. You need to be very aware of what you're doing, and also what you can utilize in your marketing, which you could see as restrictive, but I think it's expansive. It expands on it, because you're going through your work, you're also doing work that you would kind of need to do in classic publishing, of pulling excerpts out and stuff like that. So you're training yourself to do a lot of things that you should be doing in the publishing world where writing's concerned.
Absolutely. Well, it's just like this, maybe last week, I was kind of going, oh, what are we going to do? Oh, and you're looking, because you're going, I haven't done a Substack in a while, I need to do one. And you go, oh, I never posted Bumblebee. And because you're thinking about your content creation marketing structure, you remember things you haven't done that are just sitting on your computer not doing anything. Yeah. So there was no we published that with William and Mary maybe 4 years ago. It was first serial rights, so we could do what we want with it. And we had not finished sentences, but it's there. Well, why not share it then? You know, and likewise, having to do audio summaries on Mondays, like I'm working on Incentives to Problem Solve. That's a paper from 2013. You know, that's an old paper, but I think the argument is important. It's arguing that there's always a social incentive to problem solve over problem prevent, because when you problem solve, everyone sees the problem and you solving it. When you prevent a problem, nobody sees the problem that you solve, so you get no credit. Yes. And so all politicians, everyone has incentive to respond to problems, not prevent them from occurring. I think it's an important argument. I think it explains a lot of policy, but it's just been sitting there forever. But if you need something, you go, oh, well, I'll edit that, and you're bringing something else that would otherwise be forgotten. Haven, what were you going to say?
I was going to say something about trying to defeat it while it's there, instead of doing it, instead of stopping it from happening. Mm-hmm. Well, it's like the opposite way with bed bugs.
What
bed
about?
Bugs, it's best to not have them come in.
Yeah,
then.
problem prevent, exactly.
When they are in, if you see a single one, just go through steps.
Yeah, just go through the steps to get rid of them.
Yes.
That's right, but it'd be better if you never had bed bugs in the first place,
Yeah,
right?
it's a lot better that way.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That would be problem prevent. But then the thing is, let's say you prevented bed bugs. You could always wonder if you did anything at all because you never see the bed bugs you prevented. So then you might not have less confidence that you've done anything meaningful. That's also the problem, is there's an incentive to problem solve because you can be more confident that you did something. Whereas problem prevent is better, but you actually can have less confidence you did something.
50% people don't have a reaction to bed bugs, but the other 50% do, and it will be like red sores on
I
them.
react to them. It's very bad.
So, so I guess you probably could sense a difference if you're one of the 50%.
Yeah, but if you never had them at all. I never thought about bed bugs at all because I never lived anywhere with bed bugs.
Nice.
And then I went to a friend's apartment and I stayed there overnight. And they had bed bugs, and
Nice.
I learned about bed bugs very quickly with the welts on my legs. And then I started thinking about bed bugs, but you know, all the prevention over the years, you never think about it at all, so you don't know the difference until then you experience the bed bugs.
Oh yeah, exactly. And then you go, why didn't I prevent this?
Yeah.
And different thing. No, that's funny. That's funny. I had that happen to me. I think it was like wrestling camp or something.
Oh yeah.
It was something, but
It's crazy to like get rid of bed bugs because you have to be so thorough.
My mom is, she doesn't use the word triggered very often. That is the one thing she uses it for.
Oh my
Bed
gosh,
bugs
really?
trigger her because she was
That's hilarious.
living in the same building as this friend, and she wound up getting them.
Oh no.
We don't know the source, but it was the worst time of her life, and you cannot even mention it to her. She will just
So lose
shut
it.
down.
No, I'm leaving.
Yeah, I'm out. I'm out. Yeah.
Yeah, most parasites that they say will help with bed bugs don't. Bed bugs can't survive at like 122 Fahrenheit.
So you just heat your room up a lot?
Yeah.
Nice.
And
Nice.
if you use like steamers on your clothes and prevent putting clothes on the ground or your suitcase on the ground or stuff when you travel, like don't do that stuff. If you do, sometimes diatomaceous earth really helps with bed bugs.
Do they? Did I
It
miss
really
this?
does.
Oh, good.
Yes,
It's
that's the
so
main
helpful.
thing that you use. You put it around the base of furniture.
And it stops it. Nice.
Yeah.
The way you tell if you have bed bugs is you take off your mattress and then on the bottom mattress you take that little flap up on the corner. There's bed bugs there.
Interesting. That's how you find them.
That's how you find
Yeah.
That's when you have a full infestation. They can be a little sneaky, so sometimes they'll appear, you know, in small amounts and you won't find them anywhere. But then when you do find them to that extent, you really got to do something about it.
Yeah, quickly.
Very.
Because they will grab you. They will grab you. But no, so for me, that's an example where marketing or needing to create content can actually help you finish something you otherwise would not finish. And then you're glad of it. And then if you want to, it's like it's all building up to the Map is Indestructible, book 2 in the Truism the Rational. And those things kind of create some push to get you going. And the thing is, I think there is definitely... I'd be curious what you think about this. I actually think, I think also, like in my experience, some of the most creative people, like who are just constantly coming up with ideas, who are just brilliant, there's almost a curse in it, though, at the same time. Because they tend to always have a new project in their work, but they actually sometimes don't finish things. And they'd also lack maybe the marketing stuff to force them to finish. And then they get such a backlog of stuff. Yeah. It almost turns into a depression, a kind of weight, a kind of burden on them that marketing would have helped them move out of.
Yeah.
Well, I do think that something. When you aren't getting any of your stuff done or out, there's a strange tired feeling, like you're saying, like maybe people feel kind of depressed, where it's like it's a type of tired that is not just about sleep, it's like you're tired of not getting it out or done or
Creative
getting
exhaustion.
there. Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's like it's actually it would seem opposite, like, oh, but isn't creating going to take more energy? But that actually replenishes the energy to
Yeah.
do.
It's
Yeah.
like you have to purge it out.
Yeah,
You need to get it out
exactly.
into the world, and you're not
Exactly.
really like finished until you're doing that. So if you're just working and working and working and you're never
Yeah.
purging, then
Yeah.
you're gonna just feel weighed down.
Yeah,
I agree.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that's a big problem that happens with creatives, is that they get a lot and then it doesn't get done, and then they're like, well, I gotta get started, and then they get upset, then they realize they gotta make their platform, and then that's depressing.
Yeah.
And they haven't even started with that, and it all becomes a giant weight on them.
Yeah, it really does.
Yeah, and I oh wow.
I want that one.
And we'll take a walk here in a minute before it gets too late. It's not too far to the creek. We'll go down. It's pretty this time of day.
All right.
Yeah, give them on.
Oh,
They look happy.
Black cherry cola. Okay,
Oh,
I
they
want
both
this
look
one.
good.
Yeah.
I want this.
Oh, sorry.
This.
Yeah, and I think also what can happen with artists, because I think about this a lot, and I think it's really important in the attentionless economy to kind of ask what is part of the goal on the YouTube stuff. I think like for example, we try to do stuff consistently more than of a high quality. Like this video, like this is gonna be audio with a still image. That's doable though, because it's more important to us to have consistent and to also just have community. To have that Holly was at the house. That's an important thing.
And that's the thing. It's a way of, like, the important thing is to figure out where you're coming from. So what stops you from getting that consistency is when you're looking at the consistency as a negative, as to sort of bring it back to where we started, looking at it as this thing that's somehow hindering your creativity or making your creativity a bad thing, a less pure thing. But when you look at it as, okay, maybe it's not going to be the most perfect thing that I put out every single time, but I am keeping a community active, and that tends to a higher aim of promoting art, of promoting thinking, of helping people in your community, then that consistency becomes a much more, pure goal, if that's how you want to look at it, I would say.
Oh yeah, and I think for me, for Michelle and I, since the goal, like, for just OG Rose is the books, not a YouTube thing, but YouTube can be used to incentivize you to finish the books.
YouTube is a helper. It's a tool. It's not. We are not YouTubers, as we also discussed.
Yes, that's right. But it allows you to meet a Cadell or a Holly or Pay, and then also the YouTube channel becomes a kind of documentation or a kind of history or a kind of. We think about Unoy, it's a space where, when Luber's at the house, you have a video. When Holly's at the house, you have a conversation.
It's like how, the Bloomsbury group, which I love to harken back to because they're a big inspiration to me, and also, bringing art and philosophy together. Everyone there was journaling. Yeah. This is a form of journaling.
That's exactly right.
And one other thing I just wanted to add before I forget, Michelle and I were talking about this the other day, how it sort of depends on the order in which you place things in your title and what you're doing. Yeah. Because there's a problem right now of children who want to either grow up to be famous or grow up to be YouTubers or TikTokers or influencers. Yeah. And those things, if that is the thing, that's bad. That's a negative. That's not a goal. But if you want to grow up to be a literary YouTuber or or an art YouTuber or, a philosophy YouTuber, science YouTuber, then you place that thing first in order, then it becomes a pretty good goal.
Yeah, that's right. I think what you just said is extremely important because it's, if we follow the Dante model, that all good things following Beatrice, which he says, if I smile too quickly, it will reduce you to ash. You take that seriously. I think that applies to money, fame, influence, success. If you succeed too quickly or you grow too fast, it actually destroys you.
Absolutely.
And like the idea of being an influence to do what? Influence to be known. Well, then your psyche is probably destroyed if you do that too soon. And even if you do that later in life, it can destroy your psyche in different things. And then, funny enough, you just wish for the days when you could go back to just hanging out with your friends, writing stories at the coffee shop, right? Yeah. Or you just wish, when you didn't have to worry about all that. So, but at the same time, in Dante, Beatrice also says to Dante when he stops advancing in the Purgatorio, she says, too fixed. You know, he's not moving enough. So there's also I don't want to be successful. That is a problem. But then there's also a successful too quickly or growing too quickly. And then, of course, the other thing is, what is the standard of success that can get you into trouble? So, you have to ask all those. And if you're just worried about growing a platform, you don't do that. What is it, Miss Grace?
Look at this picture.
Oh, it's very nice.
That's very nice. And what did you want to say?
I was going to say, why did she say if I smile too quickly, it will reduce you to anger?
Because in the, it's a good question, because in the Paradiso, it's Dante is ascending toward God, and the glory of God is so great that if he sees too much of it too quickly before he's ready to handle it, it will destroy him. And that's, I think, how money is, fame is, many things. Yes.
Sees what too quickly?
Her smile. It represents, like, there's a Greek story of Zeus and Semele, where Zeus, it's kind of like Krishna showing Arjuna his full form in the Bhagavad Gita. It's a Hindu story, part of the Mahabharata, probably at kind of the climax with the fight between the families, and it's too much glory, it can overwhelm people. So that's what it's kind of talking about. Because the idea, Haven, is that good things received too quickly, or to people that are not ready for them, destroy them. And the principle of growing or being an influence doesn't take that seriously, and it can lead to a whole lot of psychological issues.
One of the best in some ways, but worst in a lot of ways, years of my life was when I was, I've referenced this before, quote-unquote Winnipeg famous.
Sure.
Because where I'm from is, it's a city, but it's kind of small-town mentality,
yeah.
And I was running a event there that when I was young 20s, like 22, and it got popular very quickly because it's a city where if you run an art event, you can run it that night and it is the only thing happening. So you immediately get the whole artistic community there. So it's great if you know what you're doing, but when you're in your early 20s and you have, adversaries in the city who present themselves and you have no idea how to deal with that and you suddenly become known, it is definitely harrowing, and I would not go back to that.
Oh no, and honestly, that can be a massive source of discouragement too. If that happens to you.
Oh, I did stop creating for a really long time.
Oh, yeah.
Once I got out of that. Yeah.
Oh yeah, and so we're talking about the idea of making sure you have the right goals on like a YouTube or platform building,
and being prepared for being known.
Yeah.
Essentially.
Yeah, because once people know you, they can't unknow you. I mean, that, in all honesty, to me, the Beatrice model is a great lesson to appreciate your season and to create a sustainable strategy. Like, the whole thing that we've kind of been talking about it has in a way been a sustainable creative process. Well, there's even kind of a, you could say, philosophical argument for why that is necessary, simply on grounds of being able to handle the process and to handle what happens. And bringing in business can actually help you be consistent, but then also progress at a rate to where you're not overwhelmed or destroyed by attention or destroyed by, getting something published or something like that. So that's another sense in which I think it can be helpful.
Yeah.
But I guess we'll try to take a river. The other thing too. Yeah, I mean, it's just to us. I just kind of reflecting on making content this evening. Like, it's like, oh, do you make it an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours? Oh, do you have video or different things? You think of all those things, then you don't do anything.
Yeah.
And then you don't have, like you say, that journal. You don't have that video. It's like, oh, why didn't we record something? And there's never a good time because. Blah, blah, blah. But if you realize that with YouTube, you're creating a portfolio or a ledger, a communal ledger almost, well, then you're not worried about that. And also, you're not trying to get nobodies. Like, it's kind of like you want the people that are watching you or following you to be people that are not just strangers. They have some sort of resonance, some sort of connection with what you're doing. And if you over-stylize it or if you overdo it, you might get a bunch of people that really don't share that vision. They just like the graphics or the nifty
if
stuff.
you take the humanity out of it, and humanity is imperfection.
Yes. Oh, that's very well put. That's exactly right. And I think when you think of it that way, then all this stuff like attention or business or sustainability actually helps you make it like communal, make it more Bloomsbury, makes it more like that versus content creation.
Yes.
Because I mean, we're gonna try to, before it gets too dark, take a walk. And it's important to not let your process of making videos or content get in the way of doing the rest of the stuff, writing the book or doing the things with friends or doing the stuff that you want to do. And so I think it's all very important to keep that in mind.
Yeah, just
and you can. I was just gonna say, and you can do all the things if you plan and schedule.
yeah,
That's
100%.
right, that's right.
Yeah, I was just going to say really quick that another hesitation, I think, when it comes to, like, putting art out there is, like you're talking about with this imperfection and stuff, I always wonder, is like, are people going to be like, is that the best she can do? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's like,
absolutely.
because maybe it's, for me, it's good, but not, like, amazing, or it's good, like, I like it, but I'm like, this could have been better, this could have been better. But it's also like, well, they might think what they like. Maybe they will think that. But if you keep making, then you kind of put them in a position where they can't necessarily think that. So, yeah, just the idea that I was telling Holly, if you put something out and then it's like, is this the best she can do? That's the fear of, like, getting things out there, But, yeah.
No, and I think also, if you think of your artistic creation as ultimately the entire journey of your life, then that also helps as well, because then you can't ask if that's the best you can do until you're dead.
Exactly.
And then when you're dead, you're not around to ask. And so that's
So don't worry about it.
So don't
Yeah,
worry
exactly.
about it.
Don't worry
about it. And I think also too.
Or worry about it and do it anyway. Just
I
kidding.
think also when you make your metric consistency, then also you're not wondering. It's a much clearer metric, because if you're like, am I creating the best I can, and it's inspiration based, I don't know. But when it's more consistent or kind of has a more business structure, you say, did I get that video out or not?
Yeah.
Did I work on those words or not?
But
and that gives you a little more stability.
I do think, though, that in terms of combating worry, because you don't want to always just kind of live with that worry, because it is a hindrance. Yeah, you might be afraid and do it anyway, but the idea of worrying is hopefully that you can learn to just, I don't want to say ignore the worry, but kind of ignore it, where you just sort of keep. But I think what the great thing about art is like, you always have another opportunity to kind of put yourself out there, be vulnerable. And in a way, it's almost like, see it like training, like, people who do weightlifting and stuff, like, they keep doing it so that they can get stronger. So yeah, there's a way in which it's like, yeah, it might not feel great the first 100 times, but it'll get there. Get there.
We can fail endlessly.
Yep.
Yeah.
But we can also succeed endlessly.
Exactly.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's exactly
100%.
right. Well, it's been lovely. So thanks.
Yeah. A sunset porch talk. Thank
There
you,
we go.
Holly.
There
We're
we
so
go.
happy to have you
So-
here.
I'm happy to be here.
Well, we are thrilled to have you. Everyone check out Holly's work.
Yeah.
YouTube, Stygian
And the
Society.
Stygian Society, yes.
And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank
Yes,
you.
thank you.